Hey, welcome to my channel. If you're new, I'm Cherie, and if you're returning, welcome back. Good to see you again. I've been doing a series on dealing with the devil, and today we're at part 5. So I didn't really think it out when I chose a scripture writing plan to base the series off of. I didn't really think about how many verses that would be, or how long it would be, or how cumbersome it would to film me writing every single day. So this entire thing has been a bit of a struggle, if I'm being honest. And I don't know that it was the best way to introduce myself to YouTube, because I've also been learning how to film, how to edit videos, what works, what doesn't work. And of course, it's also during election season, so there's just a lot going on. There's been a lot at work. It's been a struggle, guys. It's legit a struggle. So you can definitely bet that things will change as the channel progresses and as I pick up new Bible studies or new videos. I did want to do more videos about how I actually journal, but I haven't really had time because of this part. But because I started it and because I committed to it, I felt like I should finish it. So we're gonna get all 30 of these verses in here somehow, and then I will go back to the drawing board about how this works and what I want this to look like. So please bear with me. I did not realize YouTube was this difficult. Shout out to all of the people on YouTube, especially the ones who do the handwriting things, because I did not realize how much of a pain it was to record yourself writing. Yeah. So yeah, much appreciation to those people and to the effort that they put into it. So without any more random, I guess, asides about the struggle it is to create videos like this, I'm going to just jump into the next set of verses. I've been trying to group them together in ways that make sense, but also in ways that make the video shorter, which hasn't really worked out. I'm sorry, guys. I come from a family of talkers. Everybody in my family talks a lot. Day one, or this is really not day one in the series, but day one for this week was 1 Timothy chapter 3 verses 1 through 3, and then the next day was also in 1 Timothy chapter 3, and it was the next set, verses 4 through 7. So I'm just gonna kind of go through those together. I'm counting them as like one passage, even though I did them separately while doing the actual scripture journaling process. So this particular set, it's actually hilarious because at the time that I was doing it, I had actually just done a Bible study on a verse in Titus that literally says the same thing, and I didn't really process that it was written twice in the Bible. Most things are. Everything is confirmed by God in 2s or 3s. This is by the witness of multiple accounts. So it's not shocking, but if you're curious, these passages are also covered in Titus chapter 1 verses 7 through 9. And it's about leadership, which is so fitting considering that we just had an election, and I'm recording this on the eve of the election, so I don't actually know what's going to happen. So if you're wondering when you watch this why I didn't actually mention anything about the outcome of the election, it's because I don't know yet. It's like, I'm looking at my hand like I have a watch. I don't. It is 6:58 p.m. on election night, so I have no idea what's happening. And I am doing this to keep my anxiety down and to not stress myself out. So, yeah, qualities of a leader. So fitting. Essentially, this is, I really wish this had come out last week, actually. It would have been, I guess timely for before the election, but how the dice were rolled or whatever. So in many translations of this verse, you will see the word bishop. In some translations, you might see the word overseer, but the original Greek word that is being translated there just means leader. We're really just talking about a leader. And I mean, in the context of this verse, I'm sure they were talking about a leader within the church, but it applies to a leader in general. Whether you are the leader of a church, like a pastor or a bishop, as some people would like to call them, whether you are a leader within your friend group or your friend circle, whether you are a leader in your family, maybe you're the head of the house, maybe you are the oldest sibling, whatever it is, if you're a leader at your job, it doesn't matter. One thing that I think we as Christians tend to do is kind of box things for church and then life, but Christianity is supposed to be a way of life. So if this is what is required of a good church leader, then as a believer in the Word of God, I should also use this as a standard for me being a leader outside of the church body, or for people that I'm looking to lead me, even if they are not believers themselves. Because at the end of the day, I still want somebody who is morally correct, or, you know, a good human being, or as good of a human being as a human can be, leading me. So these are some of the traits that the Bible lists about leadership. And we'll get into what that has to do with dealing with the devil in a second, because the first part of it doesn't really talk about the devil so much. It just talks about the traits of the leadership. So in this verse, it gives a couple of good traits and a couple of bad traits. We'll start with the good, and then we'll go to the bad. So the good traits were that the person was supposed to be blameless. And I don't think that means blameless in the sense of perfect. I think it means like they are not actively out doing crazy things, but also that they are repentant about it. If you notice, there are some people that when they mess up, they will come forward and say, hey, I messed up. And other people will try to bury that. And then when it comes out, then they're given the sorry, not sorry, or the sorry, I got caught type of an apology. And I think when it says blameless here, I think it means that you are owning your mistakes, that you're actively trying to be a better person every time. You're not actually out here doing things continually that you know are wrong and things like that. So blameless. It also states that they would be monogamous. The exact phrase is the husband of one wife, though I think for those of us who are women, if you are a female leading a small women's group or a large women's group, I guess, I don't know. If you're a woman in a leadership role, you know, I would assume this means the wife of one husband. So I just wrote down monogamous because it's clearly, I mean, obviously if a husband only has one wife, then the wife probably only has one husband. I mean, there are societies where women have multiple husbands, but I feel like that's harder to get men to agree to than the other way around. So from a biblical standpoint, I'm pretty sure this is referring to just outright monogamy. The next thing is vigilant. It says that the person should be vigilant, and that means that they are relentless at pursuing what is right, what is good. They are on top of it. We don't want no lazy people ruling over us or leading the pack. We want somebody who will be on their stuff. The other thing is sober. I've also seen translations that say sober-minded. Either way, this is about, I mean, clearly if it just says sober, it's, you know, not being drunken. But I think also sober-minded, along with the sense of not being drunken, you also want somebody who is rational and logical, someone who doesn't act on impulse and out of emotion. Not that you should never act out of emotion. Your emotions are given to you for a reason. There's a reason we get upset about things like injustice. There's a reason why we are hurt when we see other people hurting, and that emotion is good. It should fuel us because that's what helps us to act when we see injustice or when we see people doing things that are not right. But we also have to act with sense, right? With proprietary. You can't just go off the whim of your emotions. I know, I've done it. You don't want to do it that way, because it usually doesn't end up the way you expect or how you want it to happen. And so we need to be sober and sober-minded about our actions. So that's another leadership trait that it says is good. The next is hospitable. And I wasn't really expecting this one, but hospitable has so many different meanings. You know, welcoming, opening your home up to people. That's what I normally think of when I think hospitable. But it also has to do with how you interact with people not in your home. Like, you know, they say that certain people are like standoffish or they're hard to approach. I'm sorry to anybody who has RBF, because you probably get that a lot. And, but, you know, being hard to approach makes things very difficult. And as I've entered into the working world, I've noticed this because I've worked with people that I feel very comfortable talking to. I feel very comfortable going to them with a question, just walking up and saying like, hey, what's up, blah, blah, blah. I've had supervisors like that, and I've had coworkers like that. But I've also had coworkers that I am terrified to talk to. I'm like, I really don't want to have to start a conversation with this person. I'm only going to talk to them if I need to. That is not hospitable. That's not how you want a leader to be. You want a leader to be somebody that you feel comfortable approaching in any situation. And so I think that is also something that should be associated with the term hospitable. Not just like they throw great house parties or great potlucks or, you know, social events in general. But you feel comfortable approaching them to have a good conversation. Whether it's an emotional conversation, a I want you to do this conversation, I don't understand what's going on question, you know, type of conversation. Whatever. You should feel comfortable going to a leader about that. The next thing is good behavior, which, I mean, it's very ambiguous in terms of what's written. It just says good behavior. What is good behavior, guys? But I think that we all know, intrinsically, we know what good behavior is, and we know what good behavior is not. So clearly, a leader is supposed to be somebody who behaves in a respectable manner and is good to the people. Like, that's self-explanatory. And then the last two, I feel like go hand in hand. It says that a good leader should be a teacher and they should be patient. And as somebody who struggles with both teaching and being patient, I felt that. I have, in my experience, the best teachers are the most patient. And of course, being a good leader sets things up so that when they leave or when they're done, when they are retired, when, you know, if something should happen to them, whatever, then everything is okay afterwards. I have personally failed to do this. I have definitely led an organization that sort of collapsed after I left. Not immediately after I left though, so maybe it wasn't entirely my fault. I don't know. But it's very difficult, right? It's when you are carrying something on your own, it's easy. But a real leader, a great leader, carries something so that it continues, that it will continue after them. They build a legacy and they create something that will always be better. In every organization that I've ever participated in, from band to my sorority, even to like academic clubs, they tell you that you should leave the organization better than when you came in. And in fact, in some organizations, I've heard that you should leave it so you should raise the standard of the organization such that it would have been difficult for you to get in had you had to come in after you left or whatever. So essentially, you want to mold the people that are coming after you to be able to pick up the torch, pick up the mantle, and continue on with whatever the mission is of your organization. And we saw that with the early church. I mean, imagine if Paul had not trained anybody, or if Peter hadn't trained anybody. Imagine if Jesus hadn't trained the disciples. If he had just come and went and taught and not had them following him around, which, let's be real, if you're like me and you're an introvert and people get on your nerves, it's a lot easier to just do things yourself. So if he had done that, then who would have continued after him? Who would have picked up the torch? Who would have continued it? And there are a lot of movements that I feel like did kind of flounder because after they started, there was no one to continue them once the main person died or was jailed or was, otherwise taken out of the picture. And that's something that you don't want to happen if you're a leader. You want your ideas, you want your legacy to continue on. That requires you to be able to teach someone to come after you. And of course, that requires patience. And even if you're not teaching somebody, just dealing with people in general requires patience. That is like lesson number 1 of dealing with people. I haven't fully comprehended it, but I'm working on it. So those are the good traits of a leader. Now, the bad things, the things a leader should not be or should not possess. And so the first thing is drunkenness, right? We talked about the fact that they should be sober, so they should not be drunken. I think that's self-explanatory. Like, another thing is quarrelsome. Just quarrelsome. We have a lot of quarrelsome people in leadership, not just in our country, but in the church, in schools, everywhere, because we've not been talking about this enough. But quarrelsome means fighting. Violent is actually listed separately, but they go together. Having this short temper, again, not being patient with people, it leads you to be argumentative. And there is a way to have discussions with people and to disagree with people without becoming quarrelsome. And there's also the very, very nuanced trait of being able to understand and see when people are just saying things to say things, when people are pressing your buttons, and knowing how to have a conversation and listen, knowing when to push a point and when to just let it go because the person's not even listening to you. I've seen so many people, particularly on social media, that are arguing back and forth and neither person is listening to the other person. They're not having a productive dialogue or a productive discussion or even a debate. They're just yelling at each other and they're just hurling insults at each other. That's quarrelsome, okay? That's a waste of time. That's a waste of air. That's not a good leader, okay? A good leader knows what is productive and what is not and cuts out all of the foolishness. Now, another thing is greed and covetousness. These two also go hand in hand. You don't want a leader who is greedy. Of course, it makes you do irrational things. But just from a personal level, like if I am a greedy person and I am interacting with you, I mean, we've seen the pastors who have enough money to buy a personal jet and they have people in their congregation who are starving. I'm not going to feel like approaching you. I'm not going to feel wanted in your congregation. Like, I'm going to feel a way about that. And so I'm probably going to retreat and you're going to lose following because you're letting your greed get the best of you. It's obstructing your ability to have good behavior, to be humble, and to be a decent person. So that is definitely something you want to stay away from. So those are the good traits and the bad traits. During the day that I did this, I kind of reflected on what traits that I think that I already have, what traits I need to work on, traits that I may have that I should not have. And those are things that I would also encourage you to reflect on for yourself. Of course, like I said, this particular passage didn't jump straight into what that has to do with the devil. So I didn't spend a lot of time on that day reflecting on that, even though in the back of my mind, I had a feeling where it was going to go. I just took it as a moment to be self-reflective about my own personal strengths and weaknesses when it comes to leadership. So the next day, the verses continue, and this is when we start seeing how this relates to Satan. So in this, it says that the person who is a leader should not be a novice, lest they be lifted up with pride and fall into the condemnation of the devil. And so I think this kind of summarizes, I mean, it's really talking about pride, which we all know pride goeth before a fall, and you know, pride is a very dangerous thing. Satan was consumed with pride. That's part of what, you know, did him in. So obviously being prideful is not good in a leader, and it's something that would cause you to stumble and cause you to do things you don't need to be doing. But I think it really tied all together, just the whole sentence of falling into the condemnation of the devil. I felt like that was about corruption in general. There is the saying, you know, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I think that's the biggest danger of being a leader, is that you're in a position where Satan can get to you. And Satan knows that if you're a great leader and he comes for you and you fall, he can take everyone who follows you with him. All he has to do is get in there, right? So, I mean, in some cases, he wants you to continue to be a great leader, but he wants you to lead people astray. And in other cases, he knows that he's not going to get you to lead people astray, so he just doesn't want you to be a leader. So he's going to try to tear you down any way he can. And so I looked at this and I started to see it more as these are places where Satan will attack. If you are in a leadership position, or if you are not in a rock solid state, or if you're choosing leaders who do not fit this bill, then you will see Satan start to creep in. Now, as far as the wording, the condemnation of the devil, I think this goes back to the fact that Satan means the accuser or the adversary. And so when it says the condemnation of the devil, it's really meaning that he's gotten you to the point that he can go before God and say, hey, look, I made them fall. Look what they did. They're not doing what you told them to do. They're doing what I told them to do. And so it's condemnation because it's not good, but it's also, it's still in Satan's favor, if that makes any sense. And I think that's why that's phrased in that particular way. Also, the translation I'm reading from is the King James Version, so the English is slightly different than our modern way of speech, and I think that's why it reads a little iffy. I didn't, sometimes when I read things, I go back and read multiple translations. If you've noticed, the verses tend to switch between being like the King James Version or the NASB or the CSB. Those are, and the New King James Version, those are the translations I use the most. But reading different translations helps you get a kind of a grip of what was actually being meant. And then I also try to go back and read the original language to get further solidification of what is trying to be conveyed. So that's what I kind of got from that. One of the other things that I did want to point out from this, because it goes into a couple of more things that a leader should be. One of those things was about the relationship that the leader has with the poor. Throughout the Bible, God says that he is a voice for the poor. He has a heart for the poor. And so it comes out again here where he's saying that a leader should have a great relationship with the least of these, the poor people, those who are downtrodden, those who are cast out of society, etc. And I think it's interesting because these are typically the people that our society casts out first, particularly within leadership, within politics. They cater to the people who fund their campaigns, not the little man. And that's completely opposite of what the word says. I've also seen this in the church. People cater to the people who are putting the most money in the offering plate, and they are not going to offend those parishioners because they want that money to keep flowing. But the person that you are supposed to be on the best relationship with is the poor person. And I think it does say something when people who have absolutely nothing can say that you were there for them when they had nothing. But I've also noticed in my experience that those are the people who will break their necks to have your back. People who have money will leave you high and dry because often the way they got their money is by looking out for self. But people who have less typically are way more loyal. They're way more likely to sit with you when you are struggling. They're more likely to come to you when you need them. And those are the kinds of people you need to build you up and to keep you sane. And I also think that's why it says that a leader should have great relationships with the poor. So I wanted to point that out as well. And the last thing that I wrote down for myself was to check yourself every day. A lot of these things, like I said, we can apply them to leaders outside of us. I can look at, the president or the mayor or my pastor or whomever, and I can say, hey, you're not following these principles, or hey, you're doing a great job of following these principles, and I can have opinions about that. But really the only thing I really have great control over is me following these principles. And while I may not be a pastor, I may not be leading a city or a country or anything else, I do want to carry myself in the manner that God has called me to. And while everybody is not a leader, I think everybody should behave as though they were a leader, because a lot of times we don't know that we're a leader. And I know that sounds super crazy, but I have definitely had conversations with people that I looked up to when I was a kid. Often they don't even realize that I was there or that I was paying attention to them. So I definitely think that for each and every one of us, there are people who are looking at us and they may be following us even though we don't realize it. So you could be a leader and not know it. And so in that regard, you should be following these principles too. So I wrote down, check yourself daily, because I need to be looking at me. Am I doing these things? Am I living up to these traits? Or am I being a horrible person? Am I possibly leading people astray? So that is what I took from the first couple of days for this week, that Satan is going to go for our leadership skills because he can take down the most people that way. And my responsibility is to make sure that I'm a good leader and that I'm choosing good leaders to follow.